Christine here with a discussion about certain races in Warhammer 3 that could really use a rework before Creative Assembly ends their development, their major development of Warhammer 3. My best guess at the moment is that they're going to put a lot of effort in the Lords of the End Times, and then after that they will keep making content for the game, but just less than before. So I think it would be a really good idea for Creative Assembly to actually do certain reworks. Whether or not they do them before Lords of the End Times, or with Lords of the End Times, or after, that is its own discussion. But regardless, these races in particular could really use racial reworks, updates, and even new content. So at number 3, we have Bretonnia. In fact, you could easily consider Bretonnia number 1 on this list. The problems of Bretonnia are many, huge, gigantic. For instance, one of the problems of Bretonnia is this annoying, crappy vow system. It needs to be changed or completely removed. Beyond that, you also have the fact that lords and heroes do not have really good skill lines. Their skill lines are basically the same, I think, as they have been in Warhammer 1. So that is a severely limiting factor for Bretonnia. Now, they have introduced new voice lines for Albrecht at the very least, so I'm thinking that they will be doing something for Bretonnia, or maybe they could even be doing Bretonnia as a DLC or a single Lord pack later down the line. Like, we know they're going to do a Cathay DLC before Lords of the End Times, maybe something after that. And then, of course, there are also the problems with Confederation, especially as you're researching to confederate, just have the option of confederating these minor factions that usually get wiped out long before that. Like, let me give an example. It takes 16 turns to confederate Artois, a faction that gets destroyed turn 2. And yes, you could rush in to save it as Lou and Leoncoeur, but not as anyone else from Kemmler. But again, the problem is you've got these factions with just one or with 2 territories, or really 1 if you're thinking about Leonis, that are going to be wiped out one way or another. And that is where you do have severe issues in the design of Bretonnia. Because on one hand, you've got a good amount of legendary lords vying for this territory, and it's not just Grom or Kemmler. You've also got Wood Elves with Paravon. You've also got Mogr and Ikeclaw, most likely. Those are all problems that make this entire research tree in terms of Confederation useless. And then many things that are just lacking. Like, the Bretonnian research tree takes a long time to unlock things. And really, what you really want is to get water pumps, or, just get improved construction and then get water pumps. But still, the design of Bretonnia as an area of the campaign map needs an overhaul with all these provinces. Bretonnia has amazing growth for their settlement buildings, but that's because Bretonnia is filled with these provinces with just 2 settlements. So if they didn't have that, they would be far behind. Seriously, Bretonnia, unless you're playing Karl Franz or any faction that has the ability of getting population surplus through various actions, is just not worth a damn as a territory. You might think all the provincial capitals would be worth it because a lot of Bretonnian units do require higher tiers, but it isn't a good system. And then we also have to talk about the economy of Bretonnia, because fewer settlements, less growth. As a result of that, because you actually end up losing more growth than you might have. And then you have this problem where if you're building up the Bretonnian economy, you need to construct the economic building, and then to upgrade it, you need to get the secondary building. And you need to do so in every single settlement, not in a province-wise. Like, it would make sense if, say, for instance, the windmill chain were to buff income from farms in the province, but you could only build one in the provincial capital, for instance. That would be a fantastic system, as opposed to forcing us to do it region by region. And it's a problem even outside of Bretonnia itself. Then, furthermore, is the issue that Bretonnia's roster is practically worthless, except Cav. And honestly, even from a Cav perspective, their actual cav on land is not great. The only reason Bretonnia is considered a great cav civ is because they have flying cav, which gives you a lot of options that you wouldn't otherwise have. But on land, yeah, Bretonnia's infantry is really weak, bad leadership. Yes, there are ways to increase this. Yes, there are buffs. But most of this infantry is just not worth a damn. The only real exception are like battle pilgrims, and that's just because, well, first off, they do have much better leadership, and they also have frenzy available to them, so that's really nice benefits. But even then, they're still fairly squishy. Their range is lacking. Their artillery is, even though it's only 2 options, their artillery is actually pretty good because trebuchets are amazing in their primary purpose of artillery, which is breaking down walls, and you can recruit them at tier 2. But again, lots of issues, lots of design problems, doesn't fit the pacing of the game, doesn't work well, only has 2 heroes, only has 2 lords, could use more units, could use various ways to actually make most of your infantry roster worth it. I mean, think of it from this perspective. Bretonnia is one of the only races in the game that has no recruitment from settlement buildings. And every unit that you can recruit at tier 1 except archers are just not worth it. At tier 2, things do improve, but that's only because of knights errant and trebuchets, of course, and again, archers. A lot of the Bretonnian units you want to use are just too high tier. I mean, look at foot squires. This is not even the equivalent of a tier 4 unit, any other tier 4 unit. It's not even the equivalent of tier 3 unit, because you got things like Tsarguard and Chosen at tier 3. This is the equivalent of a tier 2 unit, and in some cases there are many better tier 2 units than these guys. Again, Battle Pilgrims, but even then, Battle Pilgrims should be a tier 2 unit at most. So it is that kind of design flaw with Bretonnia. Like, virtually everything about this race is unfinished, unremarkable, and just really lacking, except the flexibility that Flying Cav gives you, which is one of the very few advantages you have as Bretonnia compared to others. And that's why Bretonnia does need a rework. Next up, we have the Wood Elves. I would say the Wood Elves would make a lot of sense, especially in the context of the Lords of the End Times, because some very important events did occur in Lorem during the End Times. So I do believe it would make a lot of sense for an update, at least to the geography of Lorem, and really just the entire general map area around here. Lots of problems for that. I mean, the problems with Bretonnia, and beyond that, Lorem included, is they affect every single campaign, including Wood Elves. Like, for instance, take into consideration Orion and Durfu's campaign. Wood Elf settlements require that you take over these lands near the trees in order to get a bunch of different benefits. Specifically, what you're looking for are things like growth in all adjacent provinces. That is a pretty big deal, right? Because you can look at growth in adjacent provinces, you can look at construction costs. That is a pretty important affair. Yes, it's better for Durfu because he has Karagnorn and all that, but then 2 of the regions over here are ruined, so it doesn't necessarily end up working out as it should. So again, various problems with regards to how all of this does end up playing out for the Wood Elves in a campaign, and I think that's where Creative Assembly could really help the Wood Elves out. On top of that, the big problem for the Wood Elves is when you look at their campaigns, right? Every single one of them. They do have a very powerful army roster, minus the fact that one of their buildings requires population surplus, as do their economic buildings. So that growth situation is actually important for their economy. And also, for hero recruitment over here with spell singers. Why exactly these 2 buildings have population surplus is, just a bit weird. Regardless of that, the core issue that we see with Wood Elves, they have a very, very powerful army. They don't actually need a lot of territory themselves. Like, an ally can give you forest healing even if you don't control these territories themselves. And you can also just, sell them to a faction, get certain agreements, military alliances, defensive alliances, etc. So that's how Wood Elves do operate in a campaign dynamic. And the issue of course, is they're very safe and very powerful. So you have the ability of just crushing anyone that stands in your path. Of course, with elves do take a long time to actually get higher tier units. So you're just basically playing a lot of campaign playing with either Treekin or Glade Guard or Hawk Riders if you're talking about the Sisters of Twilight. It isn't the most fun campaign when you have very little incentive to take territory, even when we're talking about the Heartlands or Heathlands, and certainly not beyond that. And so you're just waiting for things to be built up, you're waiting for the forest to heal up, you're waiting for the deep roots to open up as well. Sure, it's better with Orion because of the cooldown situation in his campaign, but again, just those annoyances that do end up stacking up in a campaign that really makes their campaigns feel lackluster. Also, they have the wisdom of the Eagle Lords, which gives them visibility with all the various forests around the map, which means you can declare war on a lot of different factions and get tons of money. Like, seriously, this will pay for itself on the turn you get it. Beyond that. And really, being at war with a lot of people is not a downside as Wood Elves. Oh, people are going to attack my trees. My trees that are garrisoned by pretty powerful units. Like, even this army right here, you might think is just Eternal Guard and Eternal Guard with shields. But this kind of garrison with a, just level 1 Lord could actually stand up to a lot of different things in a campaign. And that's, the kind of issues we're talking about with, regards to Wood Elves. Very safe, very powerful, and essentially the Intern Button Simulator type campaign. It was better in Warhammer 2 compared to, obviously, where they were before, but Warhammer 3's campaign pacing and dynamics are very different than Warhammer 2. So, yes, Wood Elves get a rework towards the end of Warhammer 2, and it was great at the time. Not necessarily how they should play as right now. It would be Cathay. And the reason I'm saying Cathay is number 1 here is not just because they need so much work compared to, say, Bretonnia or Wood Elves or races I haven't mentioned on this list, things like Warriors of Chaos, Demons of Chaos, Siege, etc., but rather because of the importance of Cathay on the campaign map. See, when you look at Wood Elves, they're concentrated in very small, specific areas. Bretonnia, yeah, it does matter, but not necessarily as much as just a couple of factions, couple of provinces. Cathay is a significant portion of the campaign map. It is very huge and quite important that Cathay as a race work properly. In order to improve the gameplay, not just of Cathay and Legendary Lords themselves, but also the people that are fighting Cathay or allying Cathay. And that is the core problem for Cathay. See, a lot of the times when you're going to be playing a campaign in this area, Cathay does have the Bastion, which is a bloody annoyance to deal with, but outside of the Bastion, the actual armies of Cathay leave a lot to be desired. Simply because if you're a Legendary Lord starting in Cathay, you just steamroll them and you smash their peasants and peasant archers and Jade Warriors fairly easily. Maybe some Jade Warrior crossbowmen. Later on, however, it becomes more of a nuisance, though not strictly a challenge. Because if you're starting a campaign outside of Cathay and then you get in Cathay, you will face a lot of armies just because of Cathay's racial design, allowing them to maintain a lot of armies. But the problem is, due to the way their recruitment centers work, you end up in a situation where the vast majority of enemies you're actually fighting in Cathay are just not capable of standing up to you. It is a lot of armies that are pretty damn annoying to deal with. Not because they are capable of defeating you, but think of just the basic Jade Warriors, right? That Tier 1 barracks. They have a lot of leadership, high level of armor, really solid defenses, and different benefits as well. Problem is, that doesn't allow Cathay to win battles, but it sure as shit helps them prolong those battles to the point they feel very frustrating. Cathay is one of the worst factions to fight in the game. Now, again, not because they're an actual challenge, seriously. I think the Vampire Coast, which has its own issues, but I genuinely think even races like the Vampire Coast are better and more fun to play against than a lot of the stuff that Cathay has. Because again, Cathay does have powerful units. It's just due to the way the recruitment centers are set up and the tier requirements for a lot of different things, Cathay is never going to be able to challenge you. They won't have a lot of heroes because all their heroes are recruited at tier 3. And there is a tendency for the AI to build a bunch of different, structures that are suboptimal. The harmony system, especially, the way it works with structures, does not lend itself to the AI making the right decisions with that. So they end up building a bunch of stuff that undermines their own campaign capabilities, because balancing harmony properly is easily done for a player. The AI just builds randomly. Sure, they do try and succeed to some extent, but a lot of the time when I take over AI provinces confederation-wise, I can see clearly that they've built really bad shit. And that is where it's annoying. It's also quite annoying when you think about Cathayan sieges, because there are siege layouts, with the exception of the Bastion, that are just so ridiculously easy. There's no wall towers on certain segments that are very clearly widely available. Like, I understand the Cathayan layout, the settlement layout, like, it's really meant to favor their gunnery units, their artillery, and range units in general. And also those big freaking dragons. But the problem is, the AI is not capable of even recruiting those units, let alone using them in a proper fashion. So sieges against Cathay end up being prolonged and very dull affairs as well. It's just a combination of various elements together. Problem when you're playing Cathay is as any Cathayan Legendary Lord, you basically can and will win the campaign, which is Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen. So all of the stuff that's out there for Cathay is just purely fluff. And so is the Compass, so is the Great Bastion. Their research tree basically goes down in the category of like, oh, get everything to get Grace of Kuai Yin and Rite of Yang, as well as, things like drill training, jade stands, fletching masters, dragon scales, and everything else in a campaign ends up being pointless. You can outnumber the Skaven with full-on armies of jade warriors and have a better economy than Skaven, but is genuinely one of the most boring, pointless, brain-dead playstyles that you could ever imagine. Like, this is really a race that dominates the campaign map. If you're playing a Cathayan campaign, once you win over Cathay, regardless of how long it takes you, there's not much else to do in a campaign. And because all of the Legendary Lords kind of end up doing the same thing, partly because of geographic proximity, like, literally, Yan Bo starts with Shangwu, that's right next to Hanyu Port. The only difference is Yan Bo is also dealing with Lustria. Oh, great, that's really fun. So you end up with these kind of campaigns that just feel very samey, very boring, very limited. I mean, when you can reduce a campaign you only need to recruit 2 units to win it and dominate your opponents, that's not really a great campaign dynamic. The Compass is a worthless, pointless affair because you don't have a hero for casualty replenishment. What's even worse for Cathay is like how many battles you have to fight manually just because you don't have casualty replenishment. Like, you can auto-resolve pretty much vast majority of battles in a campaign as Cathay, but you'll probably just have to play them manually for the sake of casualty replenishment. In comparison, let me just use a perfect example, because they both came out with Realms of Chaos. Kislev, at least Kislev post-rework. Kislev has, from Tier 1 and Tier 2, you look at Armor Cossars, you look at you look at regular Cossars, or ranged melee, just Tier 2, Akshinas, for instance, and then at Tier 3, you get things like Frostworms, Sleds, Heroes, Casualty Replenishment. If you're fighting battles as Kislev for the issues they might have in sieges, they can actually be fun. Because Kislev units, well, they have great morale, but not necessarily the most amount of durability, but they're pretty effective in battle. Like, it's honestly pretty telling that the freaking Frostworm is one of the most fun units to use, because it's tier 3, it can be recruited in 1 turn, you don't have to get a building just for a hell of it, there's other benefits as well, and really, gray unit powerful. Like, you have so many different playstyles. Think of this. You can go monsters with Kislev and they work. You can go cav with Kislev and they work. You can go sleds with Kislev and they work. You can go gunnery units that work. You can go infantry, ranged units, and all of those playstyle works. Kislev has its issues. Don't get me wrong on that. I do think the Legendary Lords need to stand up more and more updates on that. But in comparison, again, when I'm playing a Cathay campaign, everything beyond Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen is just fluff. You might talk about Iron Hail Gunners and Nangao Grenadiers. Yes, they have their uses, but really the only thing you're really interested in getting are just Grand Cannons. What you might ask, well, what about the Jet Lions and Jade Lions? They're fluff. Simple. Like, what's the value of a Jade Lion and Jet Lion? Like, if it's the question of durability, they certainly don't have it. If it's the question of damage capability, they don't have it. If it's the question of how useful they are, you know, in terms of buffing your army, it's limited. I mean, there are some cool things. Terracotta Sentinels, obviously, flying Hellstorm rocket batteries and all that, but a lot of the cool shit is like tier 4. Like, you look at things like the Grey Moonbird could be fun. I mean, I love Celestial Lions, for instance, sure, but, you know, just tier requirements, the way their structures work, the way Harmony works, the pacing of the campaign, even their growth, really. Kislev's, Cathay's growth is not really the best in the world. I think they don't have horrible growth, but they have just a bit less growth than some other races, and you can even undermine that growth for military benefits with Yang. Yeah, you can increase it with Yin, but again, just not a great design, not a great philosophy of a race. I think Cathay is a race that should work much better than they do. They have been improved with the Harmony additions or Harmony changes post Shaza change, but it's not enough to make it interesting. That's all I had to say. Costine signing out.